And we are live. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the final session and the final day of the eceee summer study. My name is Marine Cornelis, and I'm the co-panel leader along with Clémence Rode. This panel 3 focuses on how energy efficiency policies can be financed, designed, implemented, and managed to generate optimal and lasting energy savings. In particular, today, we will be talking about who's to pay with presentations from Diana Wang, Bettina Dordenhoff, Clemens Lutgub, Leah Wenberg, and Christian Hofer. I'm looking very much forward to this discussion, and I would like also to remind you that there is a final closing plenary that has been added this afternoon. And we are also really pleased at eceee to announce that the summer study in June 2022 should be in person. In the meantime, I'll leave the floor to Clémence, who will be giving you some housekeeping rules.
Yes, thank you, Marine. Last day of the summer study, and still I want to remind you, please ask all your questions you have in the Q&A section of Ruva. Post your comments and other stuff in the chat so we can have discussions also in parallel to the presentation, which is a good thing of virtual presentations. You can discuss before people have stopped talking. If you only can access the chat in Zoom, no problem. I'm also watching the chat on Zoom, so I will copy the questions then to Ruva. So please be active, ask our panelists questions in written. We know it's a bit of a pity you can't stand up personally, but I think we had good discussions already. So I'm looking forward to that session today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clémence. And let's start with Diana Wang, who will be presenting her research on KPIs in CSR reporting as a vehicle for climate neutrality. Diana, the floor is yours.
Welcome to my presentation, KPIs in CSR reporting as a vehicle for climate neutrality. First of all, I would like to give you an overview what is awaiting you for the next 50 minutes. I would like to start with giving you a short introduction about CSR Directive, who is actually covered by the directive and for whom can it become relevant, and what should be reported in the non-financial statement. To be able to give you some figures, I will take Germany as an example. So I would like to show you next what the situation in Germany is, how many companies, for example, already have implemented a CSR strategy or sustainability strategy, but also which opportunities are expected from companies when they implement a sustainability strategy or measures. And at last, how can those hesitant companies be helped who are willing to do something, and how to facilitate the entry level for interested companies. I will give you the basic idea of my suggestion of implementation guide, because a paper will be published in detail about that topic. So let's start. Which companies are now covered by the directive? Here you see the pyramid. On the right side, the text, the first level of the directive itself. The second level shows the implementation in Germany, which means if your company is a joint stock company and capital market oriented and has more than 500 employees, you're covered by that directive. And I call those companies the directly affected companies. And what is interesting is that according to the study of the Institute for Ecological Economy Research and Future, there are only about 450 companies who are directly affected. And around 44% of them are banks and 9% insurance companies. So what should these directly affected companies do? Here you see the directive itself, and to make it shorter, as we only focus on climate only, there's a summary. And actually, it states that the information about the impact of a company's activity relating to environmental matters should be included, which is a wide definition. And the guideline is published 2017. And here a definition is given about what is the impact of the activities. It means that products, impact of products, services, business relationships, including supply chain aspects, are to be reported. And there's actually no special focus on climate. But as climate is a very important issue, there is support is given through a supplement document published 2 years later. And as you can see, the whole value chain should be considered. And for manufacturing companies, it means that the whole product life cycle, including supply chain, raw material, product use, and end of life. And for service companies, remember, 44% banks and 9% insurance companies means 55% of all these directly affected companies will have to report what the impact is of their activities that they support or facilitate. So the consequence is that actually the directly affected company itself can collect data and provide information, but it won't be enough. It is insufficient. So they have to collect and aggregate from related companies, upstream and downstream. That means the suppliers as well as customers, and of course other related companies if there is an impact. Which leads to the fact that we need to add another level of the pyramid, because we have now the indirectly affected companies, which are who have to provide information and have to contribute. Otherwise, the directly affected companies cannot have a proper report. So that also means that we have 450 companies directly affected, but we have much more which are indirectly affected. And it's if we think about how connected the world today is in the economy, maybe the whole economy is actually indirectly affected somehow. So let's move on to a reality check. So how many companies really have a CSR strategy? And also here, Germany was taken as an example. We have the survey results of the Energy Efficiency Index of the German industry. And as we can see, if we ask, does the company has a CSR strategy? 34% said yes, that means a third of it. Another third, 32% said no, we don't have one. But I think it's a quite large share. 22% says yes, we don't have one, but possibly in future. And 11% said, okay, I don't know CSR strategy, so they are actually not informed. So this is the situation within the manufacturing industry. How is the situation of the other crops? Another year, and you see this Germany and says, okay, we have one, and 32%.
Bettina, can you please mute yourself? I think your sound is disturbing the transmission.
Quite interesting. But now what the next slide shows you that if you ask them, okay,
hi everyone, apologies. We seem to be having some sound issues. I'm going to stop the recording and try and replay to see if that fixes the issue. Apologies.
and or you even implemented the sustainability measures, what kind of opportunities do you expect or see for your company? And the high percentage of 80–70% shows clearly that all these possible opportunities given here, there is agreement within the majority of the participants. Although it's really unfortunate that there is no answer option CSR because I'm directly affected. But still, I think it's quite obvious. But if you look at the last two here, better rating when granting loans or attracting or retaining investors, there is it is a minority who agrees to these 2 points. And if we think of these directly affected companies in Germany are 44% banks, it's unbelievable that such a small amount of participants out of 2,000 are selected these two answer options. So it seems for me that most companies know about CSR, but they're not aware that the largest share of those directly affected companies are banks. So maybe they will be affected in the future, indirectly, of course. But I think things will change through the new taxonomy. And that's also the reason why I'm really looking forward to the presentation of Mr. Hundorf. Yeah, but still, let's take a look again at these two survey results. If we look at the two groups of those who are still planning and those who don't have one but think they will possibly have one strategy in future, for me, most likely they are somehow indirectly affected. So my question is, how can we support those companies who are willing to implement a CSR strategy or a sustainability strategy? And the second question for me is, how can we activate these 32% of companies they maybe just do not know that they are maybe are or will be indirectly affected in the future? So to answer these two questions, I came up to the idea and the suggestion to use the implementation guideline with KPIs as a core factor. So that can be a guide to the climate maturity. When we think again of the supplement document I mentioned at the beginning, within that document, it is recommended how to do that. So actually to assess the performance, you should set a target and report against these targets and use key performance indicators so you can describe the process. I fully agree with that recommendation because performance indicators are really suitable to reflect the target and, of course, to monitor it. So it is quite easy to describe the process. And even in that document, reporting frameworks are mentioned. And of course, we have this question, okay, why don't use these existing reporting frameworks? There's so many of them. But I think it's similar to energy efficiency. There are enough frameworks like and guidance and whatever, like ISO 50001, etc., etc. But the problem is, if you want to use that, you just need to have time. So it is a lot of work, and you need especially background knowledge. And in my opinion, success is only possible when there's no knowledge asymmetry. So the suggestion is to use a kind of implementation guideline because in these existing frameworks, the objective and purpose is quite clear. It is reporting, and that's it. But what we need to help these companies is to help them to transfer the required information which is needed and to in a process, how can it be delivered? So what do I have to do to get to these results that should be presented in these reporting things? So the focus here is not to show just a status, okay, this is the result, but how to get to these results. So how to develop and establish a performance indicator system and how to motivate all these companies to reach the target and to show them, okay, what are benefits? So something like data collection is also a very big topic that should be done at the beginning. And as an implementation guideline, it should be really a guide, in my opinion. So if you set a target, you should make the definition together. That means management and the energy or climate manager should sit together and discuss it and define target. So that the same understanding can be ensured. And the next step is that the definition of the target indicator as well as other key performance indicators should be user-oriented. Because if we don't do it like that,
Sorry, everyone. The video seems to be having audio issues, so I've had to stop the video. I will replay again. Apologies.
performance indicator system and how to motivate all these companies to reach the target and to show them, okay, what are benefits? So something like data collection is also a very big topic that should be done at the beginning. And as an implementation guideline, it should be really a guide, in my opinion. So if you set a target, you should make the definition together. That means management and the energy or climate manager should sit together and discuss it and define target. So that the same understanding can be ensured. And the next step is that the definition of the target indicator as well as other key performance indicators should be user-oriented. Because if we don't do it like that, they won't be used. They're just there because you have defined them somehow, someone, and then they won't be used, or the usage is just for the report only, but no other effects having these kinds of performance indicators. And at last, the success of these measures you have taken are visible through the indicators and also can be understood in the context of the target. That means it won't be a one-time only sustainable measure. So you've done it, and yeah, and that was it. But it should be a process that should be keep running, and you shouldn't stop with it except you really reached your target. now the time is up, and I come to the conclusion. So the whole value chain should be considered within this non-financial statements, and that's the reason why they are not only the 550 roundabout directly affected companies, but also the indirectly affected companies are really large in numbers, and the sustainability measures offer so many opportunities and benefits beyond CSR. So actually, it is worth for every company to do something about it. And at last, yeah, we would like to support the companies with this implementation guideline, so the performance indicator system can be used, but not only to just monitor and state status, but also how to help how to transfer the requirements in a really usable process within the company. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Diana, and apology again for the problem with the recording. Clémence, the floor is yours for the questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. I can only call for questions also from the Q&A, so please be active in the chat and the Q&A. It's still empty, but Diana, thank you very much for your interesting presentation. I would love to follow up, and you were talking a lot about, of course, KPIs and targets and so on, so a very procedural approach. In the end, we're doing that to really trigger action in the companies. I mean, we want them to implement measures in the end. Perhaps you can elaborate a little bit how the reporting and the KPIs can really support and drive companies also towards very concrete actions they take in the companies, because I mean that's in the end why we're doing that all that exercises.
Yes, thank you for that question. You're right, this is a very important point. Yeah, actually, I thought about, I mean, if you have these KPIs and defined, and I think this is enough already to trigger many actions, because the first thing is you have to have a target, not because of the CSR or whatever, but a target what you can really reach. So it is it's possible to really make it. And the second thing is, just to get to that information, you need to have a small analysis in advance. That's why I said you need a data collection at first. So you have the status quo, you know, okay, that's the situation, what can be done, what is possible, and what is a possible target also for us. And then if you have an indicator, then it is even better, because then you can really monitor it and how to reach that. And why I say, okay, you need not only some key performance indicators and you're done, but you need a system actually. It's because if you have the target, then that's very important step is to think about, okay, how can I really get to that target, and what kind of indicators are important to help me to monitor it and help me to really be successful. And that's the point where I say, okay, we need actually a system. I mean, it maybe if you think of a system, it'd be a large thing, but actually it is can be a very small thing. But the most important thing is it is helpful. It is useful. It is helpful, and the user orientation I mentioned is these people should also know, okay, it is an indicator what I to which I agree with. So I have an agreement. I believe in that indicator, and then I think the indicator will really do its job. Otherwise, it is just okay. You have one, and yeah, and it's there. It won't have no effect. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that answer. I think that's important when you talk about all the management systems, that they're a vehicle to trigger action. And there's another question from Bettina. To which extent did you take into account the new CDSR proposal in your assessment?
Actually, I haven't.
Okay. And a short question now is pretty good, because we're a bit behind the schedule, and I apologize for the technical problems we had. The original recording has been made available on Whova already, so you can watch it, but not now. Now you're supposed to listen to the next presentation, and that's why I hand back to Marine.
Exactly. Thank you, Clémence, and thank you, Diana. Our next speaker is Bettina Dorder-North, and she will be speaking live, so you have 15 minutes. She will be talking about the EU taxonomy on sustainable economic activities, challenges deriving from the reference to the EU taxonomy in different legislative and political context, and its implications for energy efficiency and investment. Bettina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning to you all. I hope my internet connection will remain stable. So speaking about sustainable investments and energy efficiency investments form part of it will hardly be possible in the future without taking into account the EU taxonomy on sustainable economic activities. Can you change the slide, please? I will give you an introduction to the structure and background of the EU taxonomy, as well as the new transparency and reporting obligations. But the focus of my presentation is an overview on the different regulatory and political contexts in which the EU taxonomy, without actually being fully developed yet, is already used. Next slide, please. Achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement, namely carbon neutrality in 2050, will require a high volume of additional investments. The amount necessary every year is estimated to be in the range of 175 to 290 billion euros, according to an estimation of UNEP-FI. The starting point for the development of the EU taxonomy for ecologically sustainable economic activities was the EU Action Plan on Financing Sustainable Growth dated March 2018. One of the most relevant objectives, besides more transparency, was the reorientation of capital flows towards sustainable investments. But what does the term sustainable actually mean? Until now, there hasn't been a clear and widely accepted definition. So this is why the EU Action Plan came up with a legislative proposal to develop a clear taxonomy for ecologically sustainable economic activities. And this proposal goes back to a recommendation of the high-level expert group on sustainable finance mandated by the European Commission in 2018. Next slide, please. The EU Taxonomy Regulation, which is already in place and has been adopted on 12th or has been published in June 2020, and which is already in force, will have a long-term and cross-cutting relevance for corporate and financial sector. It creates new reporting and disclosure requirements for financial market participants, such as fund managers, as well as corporates. Large companies have to declare today in their non-financial reporting how and to which extent their activities are in line with the taxonomy criteria. In order to produce this reporting, the project promoters or corporates have to produce and deliver the relevant data and information. These data and information have to be produced by real economy market actors. There is actually no obligation to comply with the technical criteria for the reporting purposes. Transparency is the main objective. The pressure to comply fully or to a high degree with the criteria of the EU taxonomy increases once funds marketed as sustainable seek to present a high share of investments in full compliance with the EU taxonomy. At present, market participants are just beginning to assess what this new regulation means for them, and the time frame for the first reporting, which is based on the financial year 2021, is quite short. Next slide, please. So what can the taxonomy deliver and what are the benefits? For the first time, there will be a clear idea under which conditions exactly an economic activity can be regarded as ecologically sustainable. And this creates a high level of transparency and reliability for promoters of and investors in sustainable investment products. And it reduces the risk of the so-called greenwashing. A huge catalog of technical criteria is under development, and they are actually the heart of the EU taxonomy. The criteria have been developed by a technical expert group mandated by the European Commission. The criteria are very ambitious in the sense that they lead the way towards climate neutrality in 2050, and they are based on scientific evidence. Let's have a look on how the taxonomy is actually structured. The EU taxonomy is looking at 6 environmental objectives. So climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, clean water and marine resources, circular economy, pollution prevention and control, and healthy ecosystems. 4 conditions in total have to be met. First, the economic activity as such has to be included, represented by an ACE code in the catalogue of the EU taxonomy. Next criteria is the requirement to provide a substantial contribution to one of the 6 environmental objectives. This has to be proven by compliance with technical screening criteria. In addition to this, the economic activity must make sure that no harm is caused to the other 5 environmental objectives. And for this, a so-called do no significant harm assessment has to be conducted. And last but not least, minimum social safeguards have to be proven. For the first 2 criteria, the basis is the economic activity, and for the social safeguards, the basis is the corporate or the economic actor. Next slide, please. So let's have a look at the governance. The technical expert group has developed the technical screening criteria for the first 2 environmental objectives. And the European Commission, after revising the criteria, allowed for 2 public consultations. And also important to note, the European Commission is actually entitled to issue a delegated act by which the criteria become binding. The first delegated act is called Climate Delegated Act and has been published in April 2021. The reporting based on these criteria will start in 2022 based on the financial year 2021. The relevant KPIs have been defined in the separate delegated act. I will come to this later. The economic activities and technical criteria for the remaining 4 environmental objectives are currently under development by the platform Sustainable Finance, which took over the tasks of the technical expert group late 2020, and which is composed by 50 experts chosen by the European Commission. The draft criteria are due by mid-2021, so very soon. And the reporting based on these criteria will start in 2023, relating to the financial year 2021. By the way, the platform on sustainable finance is also developing currently a social taxonomy. It is looking at a brown taxonomy. So there are a number of additional activities assigned to the platform Sustainable Finance apart from these EU taxonomy activities. Next slide, please. Next, thank you. As already mentioned, the Taxonomy Regulation introduces new transparency and reporting requirements for financial market participants as well as for corporates. It is also binding for the EU Commission and the EU member states because they have to mandatorily reference the taxonomy in future legislation for financial products with sustainable character. However, there will be a significant change in terms of sustainability reporting for the corporate sector. This is because the non-financial reporting directive, which is the basis to report these days on sustainability, will be revised and become the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. A proposal for this has been published in April 2021. This extends the scope to all large companies as well as all listed companies on the regulated market, except micro enterprises. So nearly 50,000 companies in the EU will now need to follow the detailed EU sustainability reporting standards compared to 11,000 previously. So it will require an audit of reported information, introduce new detailed reporting requirements and electronic tagging of the taxonomy relevant information. It has to make sure the information is machine readable and feeds into a European single access point envisaged by the Capital Market Union Action Plan. Next slide, please. So although the taxonomy is not yet fully developed, it is already an important reference point in a number of political and regulatory contexts, and I will now briefly explain the most important ones. Starting with the EU Green Bond Standard. So it has been developed in parallel to the EU taxonomy by the technical expert group. Sorry for the sound, someone wants to come to my house. So the first proposal was published in March 2019, and your green bonds issued under this new EU Green Bond Standard require full compliance with the EU taxonomy criteria. The European Commission is committed to establish this EU Green Bond Standard, and there will be a legislative proposal scheduled for 2021. The next one I would like to mention is the Recovery and Resilience Facility. This is the centerpiece of the Next Generation EU, which is a temporary financial support mechanism created to help overcome the economic burden of the corona crisis. Financing purposes are closely aligned with the EU Commission priorities regarding sustainable and green transition. The funds must be used to assure the green and resilient future, and 37% of the funds have to be used to support the transition to a green future in Europe. There is the requirement to conduct a do no significant harm assessment for every investment measure financed with the funds from the RFF, and also the share of green expenditures is tracked via the EU climate market tracking system, which aims to anticipate as many elements as possible of the EU taxonomy. So the next one I like to mention is the Next Generation EU Green Bonds. So the EU Commission plans to refinance 30% of the Next Generation EU, so up to 250 billion euros, through the issuance of green bonds, which are named Next Generation EU Green Bonds, not to be confused with the EU Green Bond Standard. The European Commission is currently in preparation of a green bond issuance framework, taking into account the future EU Green Bond Standard to the extent possible, and this is the explicit reference to the taxonomy criteria. Next one I like to mention in this context is the EU Eco-label for investment products for the retail market. So the EU Eco-label for retail financial products is part of the EU Action Plan from 2018. And it is currently under development. The objective is to support retail investors to assess the environmental impact of investment products. And the main reference point are the ecologically sustainable activities according to the EU Taxonomy Regulation. So still open, so under discussion is the percentage of assets which have to be invested into taxonomy compliant assets. And still open is the question to which degree the do no significant harm to criteria have to be complied with. Finalization is expected in 2021. So another one is the Invest EU. The Invest EU program brings together multiple European budget support programs, equity, guarantee, risk sharing under one single roof. The InvestEU regulation requires a sustainability proofing mechanism which explicitly makes reference to the EU taxonomy. So the technical screening criteria as well as the do no significant harm criteria have to be applied to the extent possible and in an appropriate manner, whatever this means. So last but not least, I'd like to mention the EU Sustainable Finance Strategy. So it has been created to redirect private capital to green investments and establish a culture of sustainable corporate governance. The publication is expected in 2021. So the reference to the taxonomy is very clear. The EU taxonomy is a cornerstone of the Sustainable Finance Strategy, and there will be multiple references. Next slide, please. And by the way, in the backup slides, you will find all the details which I have just been presenting. So summarizing, I think it has become clear that the EU taxonomy is a very ambitious and highly complex regulatory project. The speed of development and implementation creates challenges to all parties involved, in particular, due to the complex information and data requirements. The big plus, however, is the creation of a common language and reference point for ecologically sustainable activities based on scientific criteria. It will have an impact on financing conditions. However, compliance with these criteria will open new options for financing, also energy efficiency projects. So with these remarks, I would like to close. I thank you very much for your attention and looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bettina, and very, very timely. Clémence, the floor is yours for the questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bettina, for your very interesting presentation. And I mean, I've been personally following all of the discussion about the taxonomy also on the EU level over the last months and years. And there's one comment which I want to make, which is from Jean-Sébastien in the chat. It seems like the finance world manages to be as complex as the engineering world, or even more. Yes, that's something I definitely learned being an engineer. My question would be, Bettina, as you come from KfW, one of Europe's largest banks, actually. Do you already see a real impact of the taxonomy on the actions KfW is taking? So does it really, is it more like a reporting requirement right now, or does it really have an impact on what's going on at KfW at the very moment?
Okay, I think I can clearly say that KfW is also will have to report under the EU taxonomy report triggered by the EU taxonomy regulation, because many parts of the KfW group are bound to the non-financial reporting directive and future corporate sustainability reporting directive. So we are also struggling with just analyzing the degree of compliance of our promotional products with the EU, with the taxonomy technical screening criteria. However, we know that our corporate customers are also looking at the EU taxonomy with big interest, and we have very early in March 2020 already set up a promotional product to support the medium-sized company in their endeavors to comply with the taxonomy criteria and help them invest into taxonomy compliant activities. So we support our customers as good as we can. And actually, we also look into the possibility to issue green bonds under the EU green bond standard, which requires full compliance with the taxonomy criteria. And this is still a challenge for us.
Mm-hmm. A bit of a follow-up, and then now a question from Jean-Sébastien Brock also in the chat. I mean, he mentions, and I think he's perfectly right, and you touched that point already. The process is a complex process. What's your estimation on how long it will really take before it leads to real practical changes in the market? So apart from perhaps some kickoffs right now and movement we see as you described it, but until we see a real change in the market triggered by the taxonomy.
Okay, change in the market in terms of what? I mean.
I mean, in the end, what we want is more capital in greener finance. That's why we're doing the exercise.
Let me react on this, because the ultimate objective for the establishment of the EU taxonomy was to reorient private capital flow towards sustainable investments. So whether this is achieved through this complex regulatory framework, I am not sure, and to which I'm not sure about whether this will give a big push. I mean, it will give a push, certainly, because the regulation is creating pressure and the cost of inaction becomes larger and larger. However, the creation of such a complex framework will also create new hurdles for the market, because it is cost intensive, and creating the market routine for the data and information collection, my estimation, 3 to 5 years to really develop something, a market process for this. And in addition to this, one of the big gaps from my point of view is the missing operational, missing clarification on many operational questions. So it is not yet clear who will control the compliance with the taxonomy criteria. So who will be in charge of controlling? What will happen if you comply only 85% with the taxonomy criteria? I mean, there are already issuers of which claim to issue under the EU Green Bond Standard. But when you really look into how they document the compliance with the taxonomy criteria, interestingly, it comes out that they just say, they make a statement, do no significant harm criteria are accomplished. Well, okay, and who will check on this? I mean, many operational questions have not yet been clarified. I find it very interesting that Diana talked about the corporate sustainability reporting. And I think the new corporate sustainability reporting directive will give a big push for awareness. Because it will really oblige a large scope of companies, and the obligation to deliver taxonomy compliant information to financial institutions and to fund managers will also create a big degree of awareness. So for awareness raising, I think a very good step, and for creating a common language for sustainability, ecologically sustainable investments, a very good step. However, complexity, cost, and implementation are the big minus.
Okay, thank you very much, Bettina, for your very comprehensive answer. I think we have to move on to the next presentation. Thank you very much for your answers and your presentation, and I give back to Marine.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you very much, Bettina, for this very interesting presentation. And it's very complementary with Diana's presentation. I'm really wondering when us as consumer will be able to go to the bank and have to say to our banker, this is the only product that available on the market. And that will be interesting to see it now in the future. So I hope it will be in less than 5 years. And now we are going to move to Clemens Ludgub, who is going to deliver his presentation live. It will be on market growth models for energy efficiency financing. Clemens, you have 15 minutes and the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope you hear me well. I just need to share my screen. I hope you see my screen now.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go to presentation mode. Okay, here we are. Hello, everyone out there. I would like to share today a few considerations about energy efficiency financing. I was listening to the speakers before, and here it's very much about supply of capital, and I would like to underline how important it is to find the right channels on how additional financing can be activated for energy efficiency investment. This work is happening in the frame of the Refine project, which is financed under the Horizon 2020 program of the European Union. Okay, where do we come from? First things first, we are fully aware that limited access to finance is just one of the barriers that prevent energy efficiency investments, even in those cases where they are economically attractive. But on the other hand, this barrier exists. We know that households have limits of affordability. Corporate clients prefer to invest in their core business instead of investing in energy efficiency. They don't like to waste their financial leeway for energy efficiency. public clients have to cope with budgetary constraints. So access to finance is a barrier depending on the circumstances. On the other hand, as we heard, there is a shift in financial institutions. Many of them have formulated a strategic focus around green and sustainable finance. We have heard that also the regulatory framework is changing, but we also can observe that financial institutions have problems to find the right channels to supply additional capital to energy efficiency investments beyond ordinary company loans or mortgage loans, which of course will go on and perhaps will also increase. And here energy efficiency service providers come into play. They can act as a bridge between energy efficiency clients and financing institutions when they pre-finance an investment and get repaid through yearly remuneration dependent on actual savings achieved. But we also have to understand that energy efficiency service providers have their own credit limits. And if they have reached these limits, they have to reject further energy efficiency projects, even if they had access to them and even if clients would demand these projects from them. And here refinancing comes into play as a possible solution to enable growth to energy efficiency service providers. We understand refinancing models as all kinds of models that enable energy efficiency service providers to clean up their balance sheet, thus gaining financial leeway for new projects. I will show this in my next slide, how it works. In any case, it is important to understand that refinancing is a way that a refinancing institution takes over the credit risk at the side of the client, whereas the technical risks for the investment remains with the EES provider. So how does it work? First step, an energy efficiency service provider concludes a service contract with a client, including also the provision of financing for the implementation of the energy efficiency measures. And in turn, he acquires receivables. And these receivables represent a value that can be sold to a refinancing institution through a receivables purchase agreement. The ES provider assigns the receivables to the refinancing institution and gets a lump sum payment in return corresponding to the total value of these receivables. Of course, interests and so on are already discounted. And with this lump sum payment, the ES provider can shorten his balance sheet and gets financial leeway for his next projects. And then the ES client repays the receivables over the contract duration directly to the refinancing institution. So that's a bit the generic scheme. I have to look a bit on the time. Yeah, what we observed, I mean, refinancing schemes are actually used on the market. We found various case studies, various markets where these refinancing schemes are already quite standard. In the Czech Republic, in Austria, also in Italy, in Spain, to a more limited scope. We find different schemes. One is more oriented towards typical energy performance contracts, Another one is more comprehensive, focusing on comprehensive residential building refurbishment. But we also see that many possible application fields, for many possible application fields, refinancing schemes do not exist yet or are not applied. And we have put together this kind of basic categorization matrix where we want to show where are the empty places. These are the two places where refinancing schemes are actually already used in Europe for comprehensive residential building refurbishment and for typical energy performance contracts. But there are a lot of empty spaces in this matrix. And in order to fill these empty spaces, we have to adapt the refinancing schemes to the specific needs of the stakeholders. By adapting these several distinguishing factors to these specific needs. I don't have the possibility to go in detail here. I just want to mention the issues where we have a possibility to adapt the schemes. The use of collateralization, the ways how to handle that performance risk really remains with the energy efficiency service provider. The responsibility in collecting payments, how precisely off-balance sheet financing is arranged, relevant for private, from the private client's perspective, or from the public client's perspective, how non-public debt finance is arranged. So there are many details that need to be observed. Also, the organizational setup may differ, starting from an ad hoc setup to a long-term collaboration, or even to an institutional setup through an SPV or a real estate investment trust. In the Refine project, we have put together these various factors and developed generic refinancing schemes suitable for the different application fields. This is just an example here, for example, for the comprehensive public building refurbishment. So what tools do we need in order to promote refinancing schemes? As always, when it's about financial institutions, we have to reduce transaction costs and risk. And there are different possibilities how to do this, and the Refine project contributes to this. On the one hand, by developing standardized contract stipulations for the energy efficiency service contract, as well as for the refinancing agreement. We are currently developing a rating scheme that takes into account the refinanceability of an energy efficiency service project. And furthermore, we are also developing different models how through risk covering instruments such as public guarantee funds, the risks for refinancing institutions can be further reduced in order to become an attractive business model. So what are the key takeaways? Refinancing schemes are an important market booster to realize energy efficiency investments that wouldn't have been implemented because of financing barriers at the side of the clients and or at the side of energy efficiency service providers. Refinancing schemes are really a tool that help energy efficiency service providers as enablers for growth. They can simply implement more projects as they would be able to implement without these schemes. There is no one-fits-all approach. The schemes need to be adapted to the specific requirements of the application fields, as we have seen before. And the major challenge is to keep the transaction cost and risks low through standardization of tools and processes. That's all from my side. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm ready for your questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Clémence, and you managed to stay on time, which is good. I will pass the floor to our EEC, Clémence, who will be asking you some questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Marine. Yeah, Clemens, we have two questions in the chat already. One is from Adrian Bollier from Cinea, and he's asking whether you know why there is no refinancing scheme for energy supply contracts. This seems to be the most easiest to be covered, and also how do banks see forfeiting contracts? So a split question. Yeah.
Okay. At first, I mean, we did a market assessment for the European market, but the focus was on the countries where partners have been participating or are participating in the Refine project. Therefore, I do not dare to say that there do not really exist refinancing schemes for energy supply contracting. It may be that there are some out there, but at least they are not well known. Yeah, so there is a need for mainstreaming in any case. And the second question is how banks address forfeiting. I mean, forfeiting is an old business of financial institutions. It's not something new. Let's say innovative part is to use this instrument for energy efficiency investments. And here, I think it's simply a matter of gaining experience. We know the Czech market has a lot of experience for many years with these forfeiting instruments. And I didn't show the slide where we made a survey. And in the Czech Republic, all energy efficiency service providers that have been asked said it's very easy to get financing for energy efficiency service projects. And this is simply because the banks are used to apply this instrument of forfeiting. So they know how it works, they have developed their standards, and for energy efficiency service providers, it's easy to use these ways. And our aim is to mainstream, to disseminate this positive experience, to widen these channels that are nothing innovative in that sense, but where financial institutions need simply to gain experience, to test, to try. And then this can become really an important channel for additional capital for energy efficiency investments.
Yeah, thank you, Clemens, for that answer. Jean-Sébastien is also following up on the question about the energy supply scheme, because he mentions that those contracts are very often provided by larger companies who even may not have the credit risk or the credit volume issue, but that might be another.
Yes,
another point.
of course. I mean, the need for these instruments is of course higher for SMEs. But we have found during our case studies that also very large companies, I cannot say the names because this is confidential, also very large companies use these schemes already, simply because it improves their financial performance.
Yeah. Jean-Sébastien is also asking a question which is more in the direction of a clarification. So whether the refinancing schemes are really a kind of partnership between the ESCOs or the banks, so with the split responsibilities. So perhaps you can. So I mean, one entity is more on the technical side and one on the financial side. Perhaps you can elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yes, just quickly. I mean, there are different ways. I tried to highlight this through the topic of institutional setup. This may be very long-term partnerships, also confirmed by framework contracts. Mm-hmm. But we also see ad hoc contracts where an ES provider needs some additional capital and is looking out on the market to find a forfeiting institution.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that answer. And so now I have to give back to Marine because time is progressing, and we are reaching the last presentation. And thank you, Clemens, for your presentation and for the answers.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you both, and thank you for this very interesting presentation. I feel that today we really have a vibe. Now our last speaker, and I must say it's our last speaker of our session in general this year summer study, is Leah Wenberg. She did a research with Christian Hofer on criteria for climate compatible building finance in Switzerland. Leah has a recorded presentation, and the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to my presentation on criteria for climate-compatible building finance in Switzerland. This is a study that we did as Step Energy together with Raiffeisen, which is a Swiss bank. This is the content of my presentation. First, I will give an introduction to the background. Then I will present the methods, where we use different methods for existing buildings / new buildings and building renovation. Then I will present the results, and in the end, I will draw a conclusion. So this is the background of our study. As we all know, buildings are responsible for around 40% of CO2 emissions worldwide, and for around 25% of the CO2 emissions in Switzerland. So in order for Switzerland to achieve its climate target, the building stock must become significantly more climate friendly. This means there is a need for green buildings and also a need for green building investments. As an example, there is the Green Bond program of Raiffeisen, which supports investments in green buildings and which is also a motivation for this study. So the big question is then, what actually are green buildings and how are they defined? And so for the definition, clear criteria are crucial. And this brings us to the goal of our study, which is to define criteria for climate compatible building finance in Switzerland. So then how did we define these criteria? So the definition of the criteria, it is based on the approach of the EU Technical Expert Group on Sustainable Finance, the EU Taxonomy, and the Climate Bond Initiative, the CBI, which is an investor-focused non-profit organization promoting large-scale investments that will deliver a global low-carbon and climate-resilient economy. So based on these two approaches, generally applicable criteria for buildings in Switzerland were defined. It's important to mention that the EU taxonomy more relies on the primary energy while defining criteria, and the CBI more uses CO2 emissions as benchmarks. So also, according to these two approaches, the different methods were used for existing buildings and new buildings. Well, for these two the same, but for a different one for building renovations. So now I will present the methods for existing buildings and new buildings. So here, based on the EU taxonomy and the CBI, they both use a best-in-class approach. What does that mean? So they say if a building belongs to the top 15% of the buildings in terms of primary energy and CO2 emissions in a specific region or country, then it is a green building. And so if we look at this graph, we have on the y-axis the share of buildings, and on the x-axis we have the total CO2 emissions. And then the red line shows the top 15% value. So this is an example for single family houses where the value is 4.6 kilograms CO2 per square meter per year, which is the top 15% for Switzerland. And so that means if a building has lower CO2 emissions than this value, then it is a green building. And if it's larger, then it's not. And so what we did was that we calculated all these top 15% values by using the building park model of TEP Energy and with the help of Chalmers University. And this is according to CBI that for the CO2 emission, then there is a linear lowering path until 2050, where in the year 2050 we have 0 emissions. And what we then did was that we looked at different local building labels and standards, and we investigated if they meet the criteria of the top 15% value. And if they do, then they are green buildings. So to sum up, for existing buildings and new buildings, the criteria was defined that if it belongs to the top 50% in terms of primary energy and CO2 emissions. So that was the benchmark for existing buildings and new buildings. Then a different approach was used for building renovations. So here, according to CBI and the EU taxonomy, we need a reduction of 34% at least of the primary energy. So if we have a renovation and the building has at least 34% primary, and if the building needs 34% less primary energy than before the renovation, then it is a green building. So the criteria is different for the building renovation. Now, these are the different building regulation and labels that we looked at. We have Minergie. Minergie is a Swiss building label that focuses on low energy consumption and the use of renewable energy and large living comfort. Then we have Mucken, the model regulation of the cantons, which also forms the basis for the cantonal energy law. And then we have GEAC, the cantonal building certificate, where the buildings are classified according to the energy consumption in different classes from A to G, where A is the most energy efficient and G the least energy efficient class. Now, I would like to present the results. So for the existing buildings and new buildings, as a reminder, we have the top 15% value, which is the benchmark. This table shows the top 50% value for the CO2 emissions. And for the different building types we looked at, we have single family houses, multi-family houses, office and non-residential buildings. And these values were then used for the year 2020. And as I said before, we then drew a linear lowering path until 2050, where it's then 0. And here it's important to mention that we used the year of 2030 as a benchmark to ensure an investment for 10 years. So now here we have the results of our calculations. Let me explain. In the right table, we have in the first row the different energy carriers that we looked at. We have gas, oil, heat pump, district heating, wood and pellets. And then in the second row, we have the different building types, single family houses, multi-family houses, office and non-residential buildings. And then in the first column, we have the different building regulation and labels. And so for each regulation and label, we calculated the CO2 emissions by using all the different energy carriers and for the different building types. And then we compared them to the top 15% value. And if the CO2 emissions of the specific building are larger than the top 50% value in the year 2020, then it's marked in red. So red means large CO2 emissions. Then if the value is lower than the top 15% value in the year 2020, then it's marked in blue. If it's lower than the top 50% value in 2025, it's marked in yellow. And if it's even lower in the year 2030, we can ensure an investment for 10 years. So it's marked in green, which means in green we have the best buildings or the least CO2 emissions. And so what we want is also to have clear and generally applicable criteria. And so what we did was from this then colorful table, we looked which criteria can be defined. And the ones with the cross are the ones that we proposed as environmentally sustainable buildings. And there are some, for example, gas and oil, buildings that use gas and oil that are also green, but we decided to not include the fossil fuels. So this is actually the same results, but summarized and displayed a bit differently. These are the buildings that we propose as green buildings. We have the energy, for example, we have the energy carrier, heat pump, wood pellets, or solar energy. Then if we have the building type single family house, we need the standard labor regulation of Minerai 2002, GEAC A or MUCEN 2014 at least. So yeah, it's very easy to see if we propose that building as a green building or not. So that was the result of existing buildings and new buildings. Now these are the results for the building renovation. So here, as a reminder, we need a reduction of 34% of the primary energy. And so what we did was we looked at the different GEAC classes, and we investigated what improvement or the improvement of how many classes need to be ensured to get an improvement of 34% of primary energy, so 34% at least. And yeah, so for example, for the single family house, if we look at the first row, we need a GEAC improvement of 2 classes from C to A. Yeah, so that were our results. Now, what's the conclusion of this study? The conclusion is the discussion on the setting of criteria is important and not yet concluded. So while the EU taxonomy relies on primary energy, the CBI more relies on CO2 emissions. And yeah, this is a big topic and a big question, and it's very important how these criteria are defined, because we found that, for example, many buildings that use fossil fuels have a lower primary energy demand than buildings with wood that use wood or pellets as an energy carrier. So yeah, the definition of these criteria are very important. So what can we say? We can say that the primary energy might not be a useful criteria, and also that the EU taxonomy, they say that they will revise the criteria in the near future, and that they will also rely on CO2 emissions when the data availability is large enough. So the second conclusion is that the data availability on energy efficiency and climate compatibility of buildings in Switzerland and EU must be expanded. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you very, very much, Leah. You are here with us now live. Clémence, is there any question for Leah?
Not in the chat, but from me. regarding the relative improvement we have for the renovation, perhaps you can elaborate a bit on the target. I mean, you showed the 30-something% improvement, which is also part of the EU taxonomy. And I mean, when you start with the G building, also in the matrix you showed for the new buildings, do you have made any assessments on the sustainability of buildings which comply with that criterion, but their target state might still be a C or D building? So can you elaborate on that topic a little bit?
Yeah, so good question. And well, these calculations are very complicated, and we had to simplify a lot and make many assumptions. And yeah, so in this table, which is summarized, let's say the simplified solutions. So yeah, like it also depends on what's the case.
Mm-hmm. We have one question from Andrea in the chat right now. You spoke about primary energy and primary energy in the definition you were using. Was that intended as non-renewable primary or total primary? I assume it's total from what you said, but perhaps you can confirm.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, it's total primary.
Yeah, I mean, that's always an issue when you talk about primary energy, that the term is virtually useless in my opinion, because very often you struggle with the definitions of primary energy, and we're struggling with that in Germany a lot because the definition of primary energy is different in different contexts actually. So it really depends on whether you speak about buildings in terms of building regulation or whether you speak about political targets where the definitions are different. Great. There are no other questions in the chat. What I just wanted to know, and that's perhaps also a question of understanding, when you talked about the new buildings and the annual classification with a very colorful matrix. In the end, it mainly depends on the energy carrier which you're using. So regarding the sustainability criteria, you could take away just for new buildings, if you take electrical heat pumps or biomass or non-fossil district heating, you're green. Or are there really also efficiency criteria for the buildings apart from the energy carrier? That wasn't 100% clear to me in your presentation.
Yeah, so we just decided to focus on the labels and the different energy carriers and the different building types. So yeah, these are just the things that we varied and just.
But the labels also include efficiency requirements, right? So they go beyond the minimum stand. So if you want to comply with those labels, do you have to overachieve the legal minimum requirements for new buildings, or are they just showing what is required legally at the moment for new buildings?
Sorry, I don't really understand the question.
I mean, you showed the different labeling schemes to which you classified it. Are those schemes only reflecting the legal minimum, so the minimum standards from the building code, or do they go beyond in their requirements? So do you have tighter requirements when you want to comply with the labels?
Yeah, so I must say it depends on the label. So some of them, for example, they don't, well, the fossil fuels are not allowed, and for some of them you have that's the maximum amount of electricity that you are allowed to use, and so on. So it really depends on the label.
Okay, but so implicitly there are some efficiency criteria in too. Great. We have actually, I mean, we have 5 minutes to 12, which brings us actually to the end of the session. I will not open for another big Q&A round because that doesn't really help for another 2 minutes. So I would just love to hand back to Marine with some organizational stuff, I think. And from my side, I thank you all for being part of this panel, for having been with us for the whole week for the interesting presentations, the interesting discussions we had, the sometimes very lively discussions in the chat, for example, on CHP, which and on other topics. So thank you all very much, and I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you next year in Belambra again, where now would be the time where everybody would be somehow a bit nervous because the red wine and the rosé is already on the table in the lunch room, and everybody's eager to go there. So that's it from my side. Happy to see you next year in France, and I really enjoyed being with all you here over those last couple of days. And yeah, that's it from my side, but back to Marine.
Thank you so much, Clemens, and I'm looking forward to meeting you in person next year, because we have actually never met. It seems very, very crazy because we have, I think, a good vibe, but yeah, we never met in person, and we will soon repair that. Next year will happen. But in the meantime, I wanted to remind you that if you couldn't attend all the sessions, personally I couldn't, but if you couldn't attend all the sessions, this Whova platform is amazing. You can rewatch a lot of things, you can access a lot of documents, but there is also something fantastic that will happen after lunch at 14:15. We will have our final closing plenary, so please register to that. And you will have, you will meet all the panel leaders, and we will give short highlights of the week's panel sessions. So please tune in at 2:15 for 1 hour. And if you have any comments or feedback or anything to tell us, that would be the right moment to do that. Please also continue the discussion among yourself on Whova and other things. I saw that Bettina wanted Adrian to contact her to share some examples. So please go ahead and do that. That's the beauty of eceee. It's about connecting people, connecting like-minded people, and connecting ideas. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you all this afternoon, but I'm even more looking forward to seeing you in person next year, all vaccinated. See you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you.